John Watson, or Watty to his fans, is probably not a name that younger Formula One followers will recognise. But the affable Ulsterman had a Formula One career which spanned 11 seasons and achieved some notable successes, including a near miss for the World Championship in 1982. Watson managed to win 5 Grand Prix during his career, but aside from his first, they were achieved from lowly grid slots, which inevitably meant that he needed to pass many cars on his way to the top step of the podium. Remember too, that all this overtaking was completed without the benefit of comedy driver aids like DRS or hybrid power boosts. Watson did all his overtaking with a mixture of skill and bravery, and in one case produced a lap whilst not quite on par with Ayrton Senna's 1993 lap of the gods, was in many ways just as impressive. Watson started in Formula One in 1973, driving privately entered Brabhams through to the end of 1974, scoring points in 3 races and winning a seat with Team Surtees for 1975. He moved to Penske for the last race of 1975, replacing Mark Donoghue following the American's tragic death in the Austrian Grand Prix. When Penske withdrew from Formula One, Watson had a couple of seasons at Brabham before moving to McLaren, where he enjoyed the most successful period of his career. Watson's first victory came at the Austrian Grand Prix of 1976, a year after Donoghue's death at the same race, and was the most straightforward of his victories. Qualifying on the front row alongside James Hunt, Watson forced his way into the lead at the first corner, held off an early challenge from Ronnie Peterson before driving away from the field to record his first ever Grand Prix victory. The race is notable for several reasons apart from being Watson's first win. It was the last Grand Prix which ran without an entry from Ferrari, who were boycotting the race in protest at a decision to reinstate James Hunt's victory in Spain. Hunt had originally been disqualified for his car failing to meet restrictions on overall width. This was a critical decision in the fight for the 1976 championship, even though Niki Lauda was still hospitalised at the time it was made. Lella Lombardi's 12th place finish was the last time a female driver completed a Grand Prix, whilst Watson's victory for Penske was the last time an American team won a Grand Prix. It was also the only win scored by the Penske team, who withdrew from Formula One at the end of the season. Watson's second victory came in 1981 at the British Grand Prix, driving for McLaren. The team had recently been taken over by Ron Dennis, and the first fruit of the new management was the John Barnard-designed MP4. The car's chassis was made of carbon fibre composite, the first Formula One car to use this construction technique. It was lighter, stiffer and stronger than cars made using traditional techniques. Watson qualified the MP4 fifth on the grid, behind the Renaults and Ferraris and Nelson Piquet's Brabham, and the turbo cars were very fast, especially on a circuit like Silverstone with no slow corners to speak of. But they were also very unreliable. The consensus was that Watson had a good chance of picking up victory if and when the turbos retired. Things turned out to be rather less straightforward than that. At the Woodcut chicane on lap 4, Gilles Villeneuve lost control of his Ferrari, spinning across the pack behind him. Tyre smoke from the spinning Ferrari blocked the view of those following. The Williams car of reigning world champion Alan Jones slammed into Villeneuve's car, whilst Watson's teammate Andrea De Cesaris was left with nowhere to go, veered left to avoid the mess and slid off into the catch fencing. And Watson? He had been between Jones and De Cesaris, and with a superb piece of reaction driving, brought his car to a halt as the Williams and Ferrari spun across his nose. He was perhaps fortunate that De Cesaris' quick reaction avoided the two McLarens crashing into each other, but by the time the dust had settled and Watson had got moving again, he had fallen back to 10th place and seemed to be out of contention for race victory. A series of smart passes moved him quickly back through the field, and when Arnoux Renault Turbo started to have fuel mixture problems, Watson was through to claim a popular victory, the first by a Brit in nearly 4 years. Watson's third victory came in Belgium in 1982, but this time after only qualifying in 12th place. The race was run under a dark cloud, following the death of Gilles Villeneuve in the final qualifying session the previous day, and the withdrawal of the Ferrari team as a mark of respect, which meant that Watson actually started 10th. Initially, the race was a battle between Arnoux in the Renault and Rosberg in the Williams. However, once the Renault expired, Rosberg became embroiled in a battle with Niki Lauda and Andrea De Cesaris, until the gearbox in De Cesaris' Alfa Romeo failed. Whilst Rosberg and Lauda fought it out, Watson was climbing through the field as other cars destroyed their tyres, and had to either slow down to preserve them or pit to have fresh tyres fitted. Watson continued to be fast, while still being kind to his own tyres. Lauda, in the other McLaren, began to drop off the pace and fall back from Rosberg, at the same time as Watson, now up into third place, was putting the hammer down. Watson caught and passed his teammate, and then set off after Rosberg, hauling the Finn in over the closing laps, setting a new lap record on the 67th of 70 laps, and passing Rosberg on the penultimate lap to claim a magnificent victory, albeit one which was barely celebrated given the events of the day before. If 12th on the grid seemed an unlikely place to launch a victory push, then Watson's next win was pushing the limits of credibility. 1 month after taking victory in Belgium, Watson won in Detroit, this time after starting 17th on the grid. This was the first race on the streets of Motor City, and it was to include the finest example of overtaking Formula One was to see until Senna's Donington Park feat. After a clean start, Prost led De Cesaris and Rosberg, with a bunch field of cars fighting for the minor positions behind. On lap 7, Roberto Guerrero slid his ensign into the tyre wall, and following close behind, Riccardo Patrese did the same in sympathy. When the latter's Brabham decided to catch fire, the stewards threw the red flag and stopped the race. It took an hour for the race to restart, with cars lining up in the order which they held when the race was stopped. The times for the two parts of the race were to be added together to give the final result. From the restart, Watson was on a mission, and by lap 29 had claimed 6th place and was closing on the 4 cars battling for 2nd place. Pironi's Ferrari, Cheever's Ligier, his teammate Lauda, and Bruno Giacomelli in the Alfa Romeo. At the start of the next lap, Watson was past Giacomelli, and the next time round, he dispatched Lauda, Cheever and Pironi in the space of just 4 corners. In truth, Pironi had been holding the other 3 up, but they had been unable to find a way past the Ferrari or each other. Watson was having none of it and picked them off one at a time to claim 2nd place. Again, it's worth noting that this was down to driver skill and bravery, not driver aids. At this point, Rosberg was 15 seconds up the road and was also holding an 18-second advantage from the first part of the race. Watson was going to need to catch Rosberg, pass him, and then erase that advantage if he was to win, and he had just 30 laps to do it. Watson had halved that gap within 2 laps, and by lap 37 was past Rosberg, setting off to erase that 18-second cushion and take the victory. As Watson motored off into the distance, the Williams started losing speed as Rosberg struggled with worn-out tyres and an intermittent issue with 3rd gear. Watson was able to overturn Rosberg's advantage and win the race comfortably. Another fine, if improbable, victory under his belt. You'd think the next one would be easy. But no, Watson's next at Long Beach the following year was achieved from 22nd on the grid. A place so far back it doesn't even exist in Formula One in 2025. 1983 was the first year of the post-ground effect era, with cars having flat bottoms and designers going a number of different technical routes to create their cars. I'm fairly sure that if you look back through the history of Formula One, you will not find a season with a more diverse-looking cohort of race cars on track together. The new rules meant the cars were far more likely to slide through corners, so looking after tyres for the whole race was going to be vitally important, especially at a long, hot street circuit like Long Beach. Qualifying had seen the Ferraris of Tambay and Arnoux secure the front row, with the two Williams of Rosberg and Lafitte on the second. From the 11th row of the grid, Watson wasn't even considered a competitor. From the start, Rosberg attempted to squeeze between the two front row men, hitting Arnoux and bending the Ferrari suspension as he went through into second place, but allowing Tambay to grab the lead. Rosberg wasn't to finish the race, but he packed enough craziness into the laps he did run for a whole season. First, he tried an optimistic overtake on Tambay, resulting in a wild spin, which he gathered up, losing just a single place to teammate Lafitte in the process. Once he had reclaimed second place, he had another go at Tambay, trying a clumsy dive past into the hairpin, hitting the Ferrari and almost tipping it over. Tambay was out on the spot. Rosberg was able to carry on, but had been passed by Lafitte. Further round the lap, Rosberg tried to take the lead from his teammate, clouted Lafitte, and then bounced into the path of Jean-Pierre Jariet's Ligier, which had been shaping to pass them both. Rosberg was eliminated on the spot. Jariet carried on for a lap before conceding that the damage to his car was too great to continue. Not even halfway through the race, and three of the leading runners were out. Many of the others were suffering with tyre trouble. But not John Watson, who had scythed through the field in tandem with teammate Lauda. Watson passed the Austrian on lap 33 to claim third place, then Patrese on lap 43 after the latter lost time trying to pass the leader Lafitte. Within 2 laps, Watson had passed Lafitte and led, with Lauda following behind. Lauda was unable to keep up with Watson though, and in those last 30 laps Watson pulled out a 30-second lead over his teammate, his tyres in as good a state as they had been at the beginning of the race. It was Watson's last victory in Formula One, and it was easily the best. The car had been perfectly set up for the race, and Watson had picked the right tyres and treated them with care while still being faster than anyone else out there. He had beaten Lauda mentally first, by mirroring the Austrians' every move as they climbed through the field, even though Lauda was flat out, and then by forcing his way past. Ayrton Senna had a reputation as an aggressive overtaker, but Watson was there first, prepared to commit to passes which others would back out of. The MP4 played a big part in the nature of Watson's successes. Its strong, stiff carbon chassis meant that it loaded its tyres less, so they were able to perform better and for longer. In the early 80s, Michelin were in a tyre war with Goodyear, and were focusing on the Renault team as its primary partner. Its tyres were developed for the more powerful and heavier turbocharged cars Renault was using, and as a result the more efficient McLaren had trouble generating enough heat to make them work in qualifying. Come race day, the advantage flipped, and the McLaren was able to deliver superior performance throughout the race. At the end of the season, Watson would leave the McLaren team after they signed Alain Prost on short notice. The Frenchman had been sacked by Renault as a scapegoat for failing to claim the 1983 championship. Watson had been negotiating his contract renewal right up until the day the Prost announcement was made. He was out of a drive and at the end of his Formula One road. He drove just once more in Formula One, substituting for Lauda at the 1985 European Grand Prix. What would have happened in 1984 if Watson had stayed at McLaren? He had beaten Lauda in both seasons since the Austrians returned to Formula One. Could Watson have completed the job and taken the world title in 1984, when the McLaren was the class of the field?